Welcome to the 3 Life Lessons podcast, where I, Rob Hubbard, talk to renowned figures from learning and development to uncover the secrets to their success and find out what makes them tick. Remember to like, subscribe and follow to ensure that you never miss an episode. So I'm so pleased to have with me here today the man who I think is probably the first name that you think of if somebody mentions 70-20-10, and that is Charles Jennings. So, I mean, we've just, I think, met through speaking at various conferences together. Certainly you mentioned that you're just off to OEB. I can remember having conversations with you there. And something that always impressed me was your kind of generosity of time and thought, and that you were always kind of ready to share and to listen. And you've always struck me as quite a thoughtful person as well. And certainly in our work, we found that often it's the thoughtful people that have the most interesting ideas. So, Charles Jennings, I'm delighted to have you here as a 3 Life Lessons guest.
Well, thanks very much, Rob, for that introduction. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here as well.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, Charles, can you tell us about what you're doing now and your career route to get there, please?
Well, it's what I'm doing now is I've moved into that phase of my life where I'm what I call semi-retired.
Oh, wonderful.
I hit my 75th birthday
really?
earlier in the year. Yep.
I never knew that.
Frightens even me. Yes. So I figured that I have other things which I'm interested in doing. You can see on the wall behind me, I've got a very nice Martin guitar, which I play that and others. And I'm very interested in various other things. So, in terms of my professional work, I'm still doing some advisory work. I'm still contributing in various ways. So, but much less travelling. And defocusing, and still working on new ideas and new ways in which I hope I can contribute to our profession, particularly in terms of. I've always said I wasn't terribly interested in learning, but I'm really passionate about performance. I say that with my tongue in my cheek a little bit, but I think that there's lots and lots of opportunities for our profession to become more effective in terms of what we do, in terms of the output that we can contribute to. So so I'm still working away and enjoying it. Yeah.
How wonderful, and I hope you will continue to. I never would have guessed that you were the ripe age of 75. I think you've got much more to contribute to us all. So, fantastic! Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Well, let's move on to your first life lesson that you'd like to share with the audience. Then,
well, my first life lesson sort of comes back to, I guess, to my background as well, because I had like a lot of people in learning and development, I came to it from not a traditional route, I guess, in that I grew up in Australia. My first 2 university degrees were first of all in natural sciences. Then I did a master's degree in chemical engineering. And then I only came into studying adult education, university, doing a 3rd degree in adult education, much further on in my life. So I've had this very, I suppose, eclectic career in a way. And so my first life lesson would be that I've always tried not to be a fachidiot. And it's a wonderful, wonderful term. It's a beautiful, beautiful German word,
right?
Which I've used, and I used it just last week with some Swiss academics, and I asked them whether my pronunciation was okay, and they said yes, we understand what you're saying. And fachidiot really is an expert who is in a certain field who's absolutely ignorant of other fields. It's almost like a specialist idiot, really, or a blinkered idiot.
Okay.
And, as I say, we don't have in English a precise word for it, but I've tried not to be a fuck idiot. In other words, tried to encompass different domains, different approaches to looking at things and to my work. And in fact, I first came across the term way back in the early 1970s from the writings of the French philosopher Auguste Comte, and I was undertaking this master's degree in chemical engineering at the University of New South Wales in Australia, and I joined a set of undergraduate classes as part of that when I was there, with a wonderful guy called Professor Graham Pont, who was a philosopher and who wrote opera reviews for one of the newspapers in Sydney.
Ah.
And he was a renowned scholar, in fact, on George Frederick Handel. And we used to spend a lot of time, because I was the only postgrad in this group. Graham and I and my wife used to spend quite a bit of time in pubs after his seminars and so on. And I think, thinking about it, this idea of not being a fuck idiot sort of Compt's critique of extreme specialization really paralyzes the whole concept of 70-20-10 actually. I think it's around not going down a rabbit hole of one particular approach or one particular option. It's around thinking much more holistically and thinking about what we can do in a much sort of wider sense. So for me, as I say, my first life lesson is and I've tried to live that in not being a fuck idiot in terms of not being specializing in one thing, but making sure that we sort of look at all different perspectives. Yeah. So if you're interested in, for example, in our field, if you're an instructional designer, I would say, well, step out of that and think about other things. Think about how you might help people develop the capabilities they need to do their jobs in different ways. And if you're a performance consultant, think about other things as well. So sort of open up and think more widely.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that sounds like a T-shirt slogan to me. I think we should have this printed up. Don't be a fuck idiot. I will have to get the correct spelling from you, though. Otherwise, it may cause offence.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is so much the case these days that the kind of challenges that we face in work and in life are these kind of wicked challenges. They're not simple, easy things to solve. And we're big believers in systems thinking approaches, thinking more broadly, trying to get a different perspective on things. And I think you're right. Just kind of boxing yourself in and not being interested in things that fall outside your immediate kind of area of interest or discipline is a real kind of break on finding solutions. So I think that's a great first life lesson.
And that's right. I think that most of the things that we all deal with in everyday life, in professional life, there's often a level of complexity to them that we need to take into account. And again, go back to H.L. Mencken, who once said that to every complex problem, there's a simple answer which is wrong. He said it in a slightly better way than that, but basically, we can often make the mistakes of jumping to simple conclusions without thinking about things in the round much more. Yeah. And if we're aware of our own development and what we do in life as being much more sort of holistic, we're much more likely to be able to deal with that complexity than we would as if we're a fuck idiot and just down a narrow rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Charles. So what's life lesson number 2 that you'd like to share?
Well, I thought about this. Life lesson number 2 for me is that resilience is probably more important than almost anything else in life. We all make mistakes. And, at my age, I've had plenty of time to make more than most people. And we need to look at those mistakes as opportunities for learning. And again, thinking about it, I was thinking about from my musical perspective. There's a really songwriter that I really like, a Texas songwriter called Guy Clark, and he wrote a song about a conversation between these two old guys, one real people. One guy is called Ramblin' Jack Elliott, who was sort of Bob Dylan's mentor in a way. And the other guy was Larry Mahan, and Larry Mahan was a world champion rodeo rider for years and years. And there's a little bit in this song that says, when he has Mahan talking, and Mahan says, mistakes are only horses in disguise, and he says, there ain't no need to ride them over because we could not ride them different if we tried. And basically what Mahan was saying, I relate to that. Mahan was saying that we do things, and of course experts like Mahan do know how to ride them differently. They analyze why they fail, they get back on the horse and they ride, they do it better next time. And there's another line in the song which I absolutely love, which says, I recall a time when I set my soul just on fire just for show. The only thing it taught me was the more I learn, the less I seem to know. And again, I can relate to that as well. The idea of when you have experts they really understand about making mistakes and the need to reflect on mistakes and so on. And I've done a lot of work, Rob, in the last couple of years around the difference between competence and expertise. And there's a yawning gap between someone who's competent, which is really like having a license to operate, and someone who has expertise, which involves much more than merely competence. And it does bother me a little bit that our profession is so focused on competence only, as opposed to building expertise, because that's where the real value comes. So I think that that's really important. So this resilience for me is really, really, really critical. And if you look back through history, I mean, there's lots of examples of extremely resilient people, and there's some famous people like Abraham Lincoln, who was bankrupted twice, who was defeated 26 times in attempts to gain public office before he actually made it to being president of the United States. People like J.K. Rowling, all those sorts of, there's lots and lots of famous people with examples of really great resilience. And I think Rowling's a good example for me, because a great friend of mine, a woman called Alex McCormick, who was a senior commissioning editor for Penguin and Weidenfeld and Nicholson. I can remember speaking to Alex years ago and asking her about how many manuscripts, unsolicited manuscripts, that arrived on her desk did she accept that were turned into books. And she said, well, when she was working as a full-time as a commissioning editor at Penguin and Weidenfeld and Nicholson, she said sometimes they'd get 100 manuscripts a week. And she said, and I said, well, how many did you accept? She said, Charles, during my career, I did not accept one unsolicited manuscript.
Wow.
So people who were resilient maybe submitted manuscripts and went out and got an agent and came back through the process. And of course, we now have self-publishing and so on, which has removed that problem as well. But I think that the resilience for people like authors who are trying to get published, resilience of anyone really is really critical. Getting knocked down, coming back up again, and learning from our mistakes and doing things differently. So I think that resilience for me is the second life lesson that I'd convey anyway.
Yeah, that is an excellent one. I mean, I always take great strength from when times are really hard, just pondering on the fact that I come from a long line of survivors, as does everyone and everything that's alive today. That line of survivors is 4 billion years long, and every single one of our ancestors, whatever species they were, was smart enough and lucky enough and resourceful enough to survive long enough to find a mate, to reproduce. Every single one of them, unbroken chain. And it's like, it really gives me strength when things are tough, and things do get tough, because that that's life. But to remember that, and I like to remind people of that you're here because you're incredible. You're, by definition, you are incredibly resilient. You may not feel like it at the moment, and you feel like you've taken a few kind of heavy blows, but every single one of your ancestors has got up and carried on and been successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, what a fantastic life lesson. So, number 3. I'm sad to reach number 3, but here we are. Third life lesson.
Number 3, don't be sad, because my third life lesson is just don't take yourself too seriously. You can laugh. You can laugh at even the most serious things. And anyone who's heard me speak at an event or have seen me read anything I've written, I draw on George Bernard Shaw a lot, because Shaw is I have very, very few heroes. In fact, both of my heroes of the only two people, or the two of my heroes are the only two people who won both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar. George Bernard Shaw being the first one, and the second one being Bob Dylan. And they are still the only two people who've won both those awards. But I've drawn on Shaw a lot, partly because he speaks to me in terms of his view on life and so on. And he once said, a life spent making mistakes is not only more honourable, but actually more useful than a life spent doing nothing. So I think that you have to take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and do things. And if you make mistakes, well, that happens. Don't take it too seriously, and just get on. Shaw also said something wonderful. He said, if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you.
Yeah, yeah.
Really like that, you know. So you have to sort of inject some humour and think on the, you know, on the humorous side of things, even in the darkest times. You know,
Yeah.
having thinking about the funny side of things and not taking yourself too seriously. And to be honest, the other person who has really influenced me, I guess, is Kurt Vonnegut. And I'm sure many people of my generation and probably your generation as well.
Yeah, but a few.
Certainly my children's generation really like sort of appreciate Vonnegut. And now he was a man who was, you know, he was in a slaughterhouse in Dresden when it was bombed during the Second World War. So he saw absolute horror. And he talks about lack of seriousness, having all sorts of wonderful insights, so that, you know, the more we sort of can step back and see the funny side of things, the more likely we are to get to the bottom of things. And to be honest, in this day and age, I think we need to have that, because if we want to move forward and progress, where we just need to be reasonably light on the ground about it. Otherwise, you know, it can really get the better of us.
Yeah.
And being married to a psychotherapist for the last 40-something years, I've learned a little bit about that. A little bit's rubbed off, I guess. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know John Cleese has written and spoken quite a lot about this as well. You know, that you can be kind of serious about something whilst being humorous about it as well. And
Absolutely.
that kind of, you know, you're not making light, you're not ridiculing the thing, but it is a way that, you know, if people are too stressed about stuff, people's thinking just closes down. You know, stress is terrible for things like creativity and problem solving and all of those important skills and attributes that we need. Whereas if you can find the light, you know, the dark humour in it, and I think we're very good at doing this as a species anyway, as a society. And I guess that's kind of what the some of our comedians are there for as well. You know, some of the ones which they joke about, some things which are, you know, Frankie Boyle, for example, some of the things that he says, which you can say, oh, that's terribly offensive, that's awful.
Very edgy, no,
he's making a point. He's making a very specific point about a very specific situation. The way that he knows that people will listen is if he wraps it in comedy. So really interesting. I mean, other thing
I was going to say, Boyle can be very, very edgy. In terms of that, but it does bring home a message. And I think Cleese, you know, when Cleese set up Video Arts back in the 80s, that was an incredibly successful approach in terms of helping people to get better at what they do. You know, there was a very simple model. It was based on humour. It said, show the bad way, reflect on it, show the better way. And that was it. In fact, I rewrote one of the modules that was done by one of Cleese's colleagues early on, just about 7 or 8 years ago, for Video Arts. And it's I think that sort of approach, using humour and making sure that we're, again, light touch, is really important.
And of course, another way of successfully speaking truth to power is through music. And through lyrics, you know, another one of your heroes, Bob Dylan, and many. I think we're going to see an explosion in political music over the coming years. You know,
I think we will. Yes, in fact, I just spent an evening with Bob Dylan last Thursday evening in the Royal Albert Hall, which was very nice. Yeah,
that must have been fantastic.
And again, he's someone who is now in his 80s and still, you know, speaking truth to power. Yeah, and that's really important. Yeah,
and lots to contribute as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, Charles, it's been such a privilege to have this conversation with you. I know we've sort of chatted over the years, but you very seldom, you know, you don't really get into this kind of stuff over a beer at a conference. So it's been wonderful to learn those life lessons from you. Charles Jennings, thank you.
Rob, thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure.
If you've enjoyed learning those 3 life lessons, then make sure that you like, subscribe and follow so that you never miss an episode.